Hi, this is Becky Gromlich with the Watercolor Classroom, and today we're going to paint a crocus that's bursting forth in the sunlight with a dark background. I'm going to start with the background. I've already taped this off and put some Frisket on. If you want to know how to do that, look in the description and I'll have a link to a video that shows how to do that. Now, one of the most important things is to have your darks really dark if you want something to pop forward in the light later. So we're going to put some purple, some black, and I'm making it really dark. You can dampen your paper ahead, but this is a small painting and these brushes hold a lot of water, so I'm not doing that. I'm putting blue, purple, and some Payne's gray. And now I'm going to rinse my brush. I can't see it. I'm going to adjust my camera a little bit. This is my first time doing live. There, that's a little bit better. Okay, before this dries anymore, we want to soften these edges. I'm going to take some water out of that brush by wiping it onto my sponge. And I'm going to go across here with the darker purple and go up into that part. I'm putting some rust mixed with magenta up in here. And actually, oops. And some gamboge in it for these parts. Back into the pink. And then it goes down into some greens down here. There's a lot of colors down here, so I'm just going to make this wet. I think maybe it would have been better to make the paper wet ahead of time and then just touch it with a tissue so it's just damp. And I'm going to put I'm going to get a smaller brush so that it's not taking over the world. I'm going to take some of my pink rust mix and put some of that in here in different places and let it run. Touching it every time I dip it in the water, I touch it to my sponge so that it's not totally saturated. And then there's going to be some greens in here. This is sap green and permanent pale green mixed. And I want some of this, little bits of this gold. And then I'm going to take some, can't remember the name, manganese blue, and put it in different places too. Now, before any of this dries, I'm going to do some things to it. I'm going to make some, I'm going to get some more green. Dry my brush out first so that the paint is quite pure on it. Not thick. And I'm going to put some different lines in through here. And they just dissolve into the background, so you still have that soft look because the paper's wet. All right, here my paper dried a little bit, so I'm not going to put too many right there until I can fix that. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring some of this purple down through into this lower part. And now I have blue. So just the different colors that are in the photo reference, I'm just using them. Every time you put your brush in the water, make sure you dry it in your sponge. Otherwise, you end up watering down your puddle of paint. until you have no good color left. You have all watered down colors. I don't really want these white dots in this one because this background, I want it to be dark. If you don't have the background dark, when you go to do this part, it won't pop forward. So now I'm going to take a stencil brush and I'm going to do some bokeh while it's still damp. And I'm not using a stencil. You can use a stencil, but it's easier to use a stencil when it's all the way dry. And maybe at the end we'll decide we want some of those, but right now I'm just doing this. And we want to get your stencil brush clean and then get it pretty dry. Now the pinks don't lift as well, so that's going to be a thing. And then another way to do bokeh is to actually dip it into a color. And so I want some green up in here, so I'm going to put some green on my brush. And get some green in a couple places over here. And I'm going to take my brush through that green and get those bubbles out of there. And up here I want some grasses to be coming up into that area. I just want grasses going all different directions back here and different colors. Well, that's kind of loud, but it'll be okay. And then before you move forward, you have to have this completely dry. And so what I did is I painted it ahead of time because I didn't want you to have to listen to a hairdryer going during this live video because it can be pretty loud. I'm going to clean up my spot. And this is the one that I did. It's a slightly different size as well. And I'm ready to take off the frisket and take off the tape. When we start painting this, we want to be really careful about keeping the light, because the whole charm of this painting, of this photo reference, which let me show that to you, this is the photo reference, is to have it be, is to have this popping forward. Okay. Now I'm using one of these frisket erasers to get the frisket off. Different people have different ways of getting their frisket off. Some people use masking tape, but this way tends to be easy. You can get dirty and then you can put color back in, so you can pull off the stuff at the edges to keep that from happening. Oh, one of the things that I forgot to show you that I'm going to go back and get this other one before it's dry and show you is to do some lifting. And I use a flat brush. I get it totally rinsed, clean, no water, no paint in it, and dry, and then just go along that flat edge and it lifts some paint, makes some interesting edges. If you get it dirty, then you'll move paint instead of lifting paint, which is usually okay. So now I need to rinse it again. I'm starting to get some, and this just adds more interest. You can put as many of those in as you want. Now you can feel if there's any left, so just run over it and you'll be able to feel any spots where you missed it. Now I'm going to put this here so that you can also see it. I'm going to get my really fine brush. It's not a fancy brush, but it works really well, and it's going to work for those grasses. Well, I don't know if I can find it. There it is. This is a Simply Simmons #2, and it's student grade, but I still like it for lots of fine things. And I'm going to just put some bright greens into some of these. And it doesn't go bright green the whole way, but I really want the tips to pop. I'm going to also get some bright yellow out here for some of these ends. Because they're catching the light. And so if you have them bright, then they'll catch the light. And then I'm just going to get some sap green. Mix it with a little bit of the permanent pale so it's not so dark. And finish these off. And they have some blues in them too, so I'm going to go in and get some of my manganese and put little bits of that in here too. Okay, I have a little bit of gamboge in on my brush, because that one right there, that curly one, I like the way the gamboge looks on there. Got some rust going in it too. And yet the very tip of it is bright enough that it pops. And at the bottom it gets the lovely green. Oops. I'm just going to run over that with water to make the edges disappear a bit. Now the very tip of this has got some pink in it, and I'm going to put some plain yellow too to make that piece pop. Now that piece isn't in the front, but I think these greens will cover it pretty nicely, so I'm just going to go right over it. It's better if your Frisket goes over your tape. And then in order to make that look more 3D, I'm just going to put some blue along one side. Well, a couple of these are pale pink looking color. And then it goes into the raster color. Well, you can't really see where it goes on that, but I'm going to make it that darker color. This one's just really light. I'm just adding lots of water. And not worrying about too much about having it the exact color. And then towards the bottom it has some of that raster color. So just, I'm doing each blade of grass. I know that sounds crazy, but this is the detail part. The background's all done. I want all of these to pop a little bit. I'm getting a little brown here, just mixing some green in with my pink. And that one I want to push back more, so I'm just going to wash over it. Soften the edges all the way around. Some of these aren't in the picture. I just wanted a few more grasses to be foreground. And you can do some of this too. Just go across what's there and have some more foreground that way. Oh, I just want that one piece to pop up a little bit more, like the light is hitting it. This one has some blues in it. Almost done with the grasses. Just getting rid of some of the white in there. And now for the crocus. For the crocus, I want a brush that has a fine tip. But that's a quill, so that it holds a little bit more water. And at this point, you probably need to change your water and maybe wash your hands. We want to really protect the light in this. And I'm going to clean up an area too, so that I have room on my palette for these lighter, purer colors without them getting contaminated. Now the pink in this is a magenta, so I'm getting a little bit of magenta out. And then the blue has little bits of purple, but it also has some ultramarine type of blue in it. So I've got purple and ultramarine mixed, and then some plain ultramarine on my palette. And I want to start with really light, because you have to save the light. And so I'm going to start here. That's really light. Keeping that light, and I'm touching the color over there and letting it soften that edge. Now at the very tip, there's some actual just plain white. One thing it's a good idea to do is actually start in a less important place. So I started at the main petal that needs to be light. But it helps if you start somewhere in the back. It doesn't matter, like this petal back here. This one has a shadow on it, and it doesn't stand out as much from the background because of that. Get this dark line coming down here, darker line. Dipping it in the water, drying it off, and softening that edge with just plain water. And then we're into our magenta. Ooh, I got a lot of it. So I got some water on there to soften it. This is very light here. And it has a little bit of a darker area right there. I'm just going to let that kind of blend in there. Then there's this stuff that wraps around here. Drying my brush, dipping it in the water and drying it and coming across. Now, one of the things that helps me a lot is using these squares to see if I have my darks dark. And that doesn't look too bad. That petal might have gotten too dark. This area is light enough, but this area is not, so that makes it not stand out as well. Okay. So I'm going to get this part in here. There's a little white light area, and then it goes across there. Some purpler. Dipping my brush, drying it off, and it goes all the way across. And this little bit of the tip is pretty darker than the right around it. There's a little white edge there, so I'm going to attempt to leave it. And then it gets lighter, so dip my brush, smooth out those edges. And then I'm getting into some magenta here. Now this also right here has a little bit of some kind of yellow in it. All right, let's go on up to the top of this. There's a little white part at the very top. A little shine. And then there's a shine in here too. This is maybe the slowest part on here because I really want it to look realistic. But if you're a painter who doesn't care as much about it being so realistic, then just paint it in more impressionist style. Just make sure that you get your darks dark and your lights light, because that's what makes it look 3D. And the actual colors that you use, they don't matter nearly as much as having the values right. Dark's dark and the light's light. I'm going to go on to the next petal, to this inside petal again, and get it fixed. This part's pretty light, so I'm going to water a puddle down a little bit more. Get it light all the way down. And then there's just a slightly darker area right here. All right, now back to this petal. Let's see. Don't want that to get dark, but I want it to be blue enough so that it looks blue. This gets quite pale as it goes down. And I'm not worrying too much about what color it is. Now I see that it actually needs some more dark over here in order for the light to look light enough on that other side. We're just about done, but I want to take my tape off and look at it and see what it really looks like before I make any more decisions. I love taking tape off. It kind of brings everything alive, and then you can see what you really have. If you have any questions, I would love it if you'd put them on in the comments, and I'll try to answer them as best I can. Okay, now one of the things that I always do is some repair on stuff. I always add, and sometimes I use a little bit of bleed-proof white, and I want to add a little bit more light into this up here. And so I am going to use my stencil and a stencil brush that I've dipped in clean water, and then I'm running out of tissues. I've dipped it in clean water, and then I've pushed it into the sponge. And then if you want, you can go back and make them green or some other color. So clean water, pushed into the sponge, and I don't want to mess up my border completely, so I'm going to just do this side of it. And see, it gets a little bit of a sharper edge there. And then this one I want to overlap because they just have more charm when you overlap them. But I want this one to be lighter and not come down into the bottom with such a dark circle. You have to remember to wipe off your stencil too, not just your brush and the paper. Overlapping again. Not doing too much on that one. I want it to all be lifted. And then I'm going to do one or two little ones down lower. That barely show. Just to add some light down in here. Okay, well, you get the idea. And then one last thing that I'd like to show you is that sometimes when you lose your light, it helps to use bleed-proof white. Let's see if I have any handy. Well, I don't. I don't want to make you wait while I go search for it. So I'm going to do some other softening along here. When you have too sharp of an edge, it looks cut out. Looks like you cut something out and pasted it onto your background. And that's not really very attractive. And so, if you don't want it to run too far, you can use a tissue. So this is just clean water that I'm using. I'm going to take a brush with an edge. See if I have a little one. And squeeze out the extra water. And see if I can get this little edge right here. No, it's not stiff enough. I'll just try this. There's a little white edge there, like a flap, and I lost it a little bit. Oh, I see partly why. This is why it helps to look at stuff after you're all done. Part of it is because in here is this shadow. That makes that pop forward. That's better. I want to diminish this a little bit down here. I'm going to let it go brownish. Well, then you just look at little stuff, see what you see. I'll soften some of these tips. Sometimes when I'm doing Frisket, I use a brush, and sometimes I use an ink pen. If you want really fine looking frisket lines, then you'll want to use an ink pen. I think I'm going to call that done. Time to put my signature. Oh, see, I always see one more thing as soon as I call it done. All right, one more thing. I'm just going to blend all this a little bit. Too many stark things there. Usually the whole plant doesn't stand out. Okay. Get a really clean brush. Come back this way. And then I use tape to do my signature. My paper's too wet, so I'm not going to do it now. But I hope you try this and that you paint it along with me next time I go live. Thank you so much for watching. Don't know how to end it.